It gives me great pleasure to introduce you to Richard Taylor, the designer of the movie Enterprise.
My father was a career Air Force officer, and my mother was a wonderful artist. And they were all from Indiana originally. So my mother was a huge influence on me growing up.
And you're a Hoosier then?
Yes. Well, I was actually born in Texas because my father was an Air Force officer. He was a cadet there, and the day after they graduated, he and my mom got married. And a year later, I popped out. So I was born in Texas, but we moved all around the world growing up. But my mother was a huge influence on me in the arts. She gave me drawing lessons. She could draw. I always liked drawing. I loved making models, whether it was models that could fly out of balsa wood and tissue paper and
dope,
banana dope. So I made lots of models, including flying models and plastic cars and airplanes and so forth. So I always loved technical, mechanical things, but I always loved the arts. My mother made sure I had music lessons. I took ballet. I was in plays when I was young. I was in musicals. So I was always surrounded by the arts through my mother's influence. But I ended up eventually going to the University of Utah, where I got my Bachelor of Fine Arts in painting and drawing. And then I started this light show, Rainbow Jam, and became a light show artist and graphic designer for years, and then eventually won this Cole Porter Fellowship to USC, which allowed me to move to Los Angeles, where I got my master's degree in photography and printmaking. And right after I graduated, when I started, looking for a place to land, I ended up at Robert Abel and Associates, and that was really the beginning of my real career as a filmmaker.
And what was Robert Abel at that time?
Robert Abel was a small shop, production company that specialized in graphics, and one of the key people that was there was Con Pedersen, who was one of the 3 effects directors on 2001. And as you know, in 2001, he and Doug Trumbull invented the slit scan process, the Stargate corridor sequence with all the Z-axis stuff coming by, and that was something nobody had ever seen before. So when Con came back to the States, he kept working in that format, developing circle slit scan and streak. Robert Abel had been a graphic designer. He graduated from UCLA Film School. He worked for Saul Bass. He worked a little bit with John Whitney Sr. And he had met Con Pedersen at Graphic Films. And so Bob was starting this production company to do commercials or film graphics. And he and Con had joined up, and at the time that I interviewed there, initially there was Con Pedersen and Bob Abel and Dick Alexander, an Englishman, a camera designer who built the camera systems.
How did you find out about Abel to go there to?
Well, on graduating, one of the problems that I had was I did too many types of things, and I had to make a decision about what field was I going to go into: painting, graphics, filmmaking, and I really finally decided that I wanted to go into graphic film making. The films that I had made as a student were synesthetic films. The whole continuous metamorphical type of imagery was popular. It was the late 60s and early 70s. And I had carried my portfolio, which had posters and graphics and my master's thesis and all this all around town, and hadn't really gotten a job yet. So one night I said, I'm going to watch television, and whatever I see, the most amazing thing I see, whoever did it, I'm going to go knock on that door and see if I can get a job there. And it was a slit scan piece for ABC television for the Saturday night movies, and it was just 2 planes of graphics coming at you, very much like 2001.
Yeah.
And I inquired around, and somebody said, well, I think it's this guy Bob Abel, and he's got this studio down there on Highland. And so I called up, and Sylvie answered the phone, and I told her a little about myself, and she asked Bob, and he said, yeah, have him come in. So I went in and interviewed with Bob. And a really amazing thing happened, actually. In my portfolio of posters and graphics was the Rainbow Jam stationery, which was the main page had this shape on it of a rainbow and a sky of clouds that you wrote over. And I was going through my portfolio and I came to that and he said, "Stop, stop." And I said, "Wait, why?" He said, "Where'd you get that?" And I said, "Well, what do you mean? It's my stationery for Rainbow Jam, the graphics and light show company I had." He said, "Well, that's incredible because that is the first page of my wedding album." And what had happened, Bob had, when he married Kristen, they had gone to San Francisco and they stayed with Ray Anderson, who had Holy See Light Show. He collected graphics and posters, and he had collected some of my stationery. It was on his desk, and the morning after their first night together, Bob got up and went to the desk, found this, and wrote this love letter to her on this stationery, and that ended up being the first page of their wedding album. So luck and fortune and a lot of things came together right there.
Yeah.
But it happened because I had a portfolio of a lot of work.
Yeah, when the door opens, you have to be able to step through it.
Yeah, you have to
And
have...
you never know when it's going to open.
That's right. So I was prepared. And he said, "Wow, I'd love to hire you, but we really are on a budget. I don't have much money." And I said, "Well, I'm a starving artist, so, you know, anything would be good." He said, "Well, how about like $100 a week?" And I said, "Perfect. I'll take it. That's plenty." And that was the beginning, and things kept changing. Con and I created a whole new look in film. The 7-Up on Cola and the See the Light commercials, the Bubbles commercials.
And that's what you've got the Clios for, is
Yes,
that...
a couple of these Clios are for the 7-Up campaign done back in 1975. And the place became innovative and noteworthy. We changed the look of graphics in American advertising. That Bubbles commercial was the first really graphic, psychedelic, if you want to call it that, commercial.
And it was all backlit stuff, wasn't
It
it?
was backlit and slit scan and streak, and it was
Yeah.
all done in camera. This was 75. This is long before the computer graphics or CGI. It was all done in camera. It was all hand-drawn artwork. Sometimes a frame would have 25, 35 exposures. And but Con Pedersen and I just locked up. I learned so much from him. What a wonderful man. And we invented the language. We invented everything that you saw in those commercials. So it was really fun. And I was there through Star Trek.
Okay, before we get to Star Trek, there's a lovely little story about the three of us, in that you, with your Rainbow Jam, you did some light shows at the Fillmore.
Yes.
Okay. Now, when you were doing... That's okay, we can stop. So, when you were doing light shows at the Fillmore, Jim was across in Berkeley making sandals and custom leather goods, real high-end stuff. And almost every weekend, he was at the Fillmore watching a concert. Almost every weekend, I was at the Fillmore because Funky Features was in the Haight-Ashbury. So the three of us, probably, there's a good chance, serendipity being what it is, there's a good chance that the three of us, having not known each other back then, were in the same place at the same time.
That very well could have happened. Rainbow Jam did play the Fillmore, but we did the Winterland and the Family Dog. We did all those major venues.
Yeah.
And we did graphics as well, so we did a lot of posters for many of the shows that we did the lights for. But yeah, good chance we hallucinated on each other.
And then, then we all met up 13 years later, or 12 years later after that on Star Trek.
Yeah.
So then, okay, so Star Trek now, and the Enterprise, really, this is what we're interested in. So how did that come about then with Magicam and Gene Roddenberry?
Well, I was at Robert Abel and Associates, and I was the main kind of designer, director, and we were approached by Paramount to get involved in the feature. And well, Robert Abel and Associates was approached by Paramount to do the effects for the film because the studio had a really great reputation. We were doing really new, cutting-edge, modern stuff that didn't look like anybody else,
But it was all for TV.
it was all for TV. Robert Abel had done several features, all documentaries, Mad Dogs and Englishmen, Making the President, and so forth. But and Con Pedersen had worked on
2001.
2001.
Yeah.
But it was really the work we did as a studio that they saw, and someone at Paramount made that decision to approach us. And so obviously, as a part of doing that, first of all, we were approached after they had made a decision to make Star Trek a feature. They already had a television show in development. It was going to be a television feature, and so they had already started to build sets and some models and had done quite a bit of work on it. When we got involved was when they decided to make a feature. And I think the success of Star Wars was a big influence on that.
It had to be.
Yeah. And so we were approached by Paramount, and the first thing that I needed to do as the designer was to take a look at everything that had been done. And the models that had been built to that point had been done by Magicam, as they were a part of Paramount Studios. And I also went to the studio and met with the art directors and the people building all the sets, and just looked at the whole project overall. And then we went back and analyzed all that and decided what we thought needed to be done to make it work as a feature, which was basically scrap everything you've done and start from scratch. I mean, one needs to remember at that time that 2001 had come out, and Star Wars, and those movies had phenomenal design and incredible care in the way they were designed and made. And that was the standard that we had to look at, and the photographic techniques that evolved, especially during Star Wars. So the way models were made, the way sets were built, all of the design of a movie had to be really, really cohesive. And I felt that everything that they had built just really looked antiquated, looked like another era. And so it was our suggestion that we start rebuilding. So I went to Magicam as a part of analyzing what we needed to do in the picture, and that's when I met Jim Dow, when I met Joe Matza, and all the people that were there at Magicam working on the television project. Part of what we looked at was a model that was being built, or that was not being built by Magicam. The Enterprise was being built out in the valley by a different fella.
And do we know who that was? Because Jim can't remember.
I can probably find out. But
because in the chronological scheme of things, I mean, this is something that the fans really they want to know every little step of the way.
I know that maybe Tobias knows. I know. Jim couldn't remember?
No.
Well,
he saw it, and he said, well, it just wouldn't do.
No, well, first of all, the model that was being built was way too small. It was really a fraction of the scale of the one that was made for the television show. And when you build models correctly to shoot them and for them to have scale and believability and detail that they need, you have to build them quite large so that you can get very close to them, so that you can build the technical and mechanical things into them, the lighting systems, if anything animates or moves, the motors and everything it takes to make them function well. But it's infinitely easier to shoot something that has a little scale to it than something small. And this model that they were designing was just way too small. It really could only be armatured from below, It didn't really have lights built into it. It just wouldn't work. And especially, again, if you look at the quality of the miniature work in Star Wars. So the Enterprise was one of the main things that had to be rebuilt and redesigned from scratch, and it needed to be designed for the technology that films were being made with at that time. And it's the star of the franchise, and it needed to be beautiful, it needed to be inspiring, it needed to be really special. And so I put a lot of time and care into really, really trying to make it more elegant, to emphasize the lines of it in ways that were not there. I mean, the Enterprise for the television show is an entirely different thing. So we were designing a new Enterprise. The one caveat that was absolutely critical was that Gene Roddenberry absolutely demanded that it have the same configuration, because that's a character. The saucer, the strut, the lower fuselage, the struts, and the nacelles, and that configuration with the struts being at an angle and the nacelles back here. That he felt was the character, so it had to have that same configuration, because I initially asked if I could really do something entirely different, and he basically said you have to stick to that configuration, but within that you can do what you need to do. So I changed the proportions of everything. I tried to give it a kind of Art Deco quality to it. A lot of horizontal lines, real transitions between parts. And if one really knows how airplanes and flying craft and jets and airliners and things are built, it has to be some structural continuity.
That makes sense.
That makes sense. Now, it is a craft that lives in outer space where there is no gravity. And I will say that the Enterprise is really an unusual shape to exist in outer space. And the reason I say that is that anything in weightlessness, a tin can, a pair of pliers, whatever it is, you let it go in space and it will spin around its center of gravity. Well, if you really look at the Enterprise, it's a very unbalanced object. And if you put that in outer space and gave it a spin, the center of gravity is outside of itself. It's somewhere between the rear of the thing and the front of the fuselage, and the front of the saucer, and out here somewhere. So it's a very unbalanced design. But with the theory of the physics that were employed by the franchise, people are walking around in zero gravity with gravity inside the spaceship. So how that happens, right there, you're in science fiction. So the little thrusters all around the exterior of the Enterprise, the ion engine and other things to be able to maneuver it, propel it. So I designed into the thing all the thrusters everywhere. The saucer was designed to jettison, become its own craft, its own landing gear, its own ion engine. So it was a self-contained craft in its own right. But I really tried to employ aircraft design and spacecraft design so that it really, felt like something that could be real.
Well, when I got the gig to do all the pearl paint detail, the first thing I did was to go down to Hawthorne and get the Crescent paints. And the second thing I did is I went out to LAX, and at that time you could walk right up to the airplanes. Mm-hmm. And I had my Polaroid, the camera, the one that folds flat,
Oh, yes,
that lovely
Polaroid.
one.
Yes.
Yeah, and I had 10 packs of film,
Mm-hmm.
and I shot 100 shots of airplanes up close, mainly the engine nacelles and the engines themselves, to see how they were put together, mm-hmm. because that would come in handy in determining some of the panel breakup on the ship to make it look, in a person's eye, real.
Mm-hmm. Well, that's exactly the kind of detail that we all got into in designing the Enterprise, trying to create something that structurally looked like it was built with technologies that are used to make craft like that. The designs of the nacelles, I spent more time on the design of the nacelles than anything, because I felt that those circular round ones that were in the television series were just not elegant at all, and they didn't have any detail, and they really killed scale. And if you really understand the function of the nacelles, which again, this is all science fiction, but the Enterprise, for those who don't really know, those nacelles have antimatter in them. When they are fired up, they basically create a hole in space, or a disturbance in space. And if you look at the tail of the Enterprise and the end of the nacelles, it's like a surfboard. Literally, the Enterprise is riding on the wake of this disturbance that's being made in space. So it's surfing, in essence, through space. So I wanted to have an effect that happened off of the nacelles. I wanted it, the reason it has those horizontal metal pieces on the inside and outside that kind of run the length that are, is those are supposed to be like large magnets. They're supposed to be raw metal, and they can create these force fields. We wanted to do an effect off of them, but in the end, when the film got done, there wasn't time or money probably to do that. But that was part of the thought in the design. So the nacelles, I really wanted them to kind of set the pace for the whole thing. The saucer, I elongated it, made it larger. It has a reverse curve when it comes out to the edge. There's horizontal lines around the perimeter of the saucer. There are a lot of horizontal lines in the Enterprise. And then, of course, that final texture, which you so lovingly created, was kind of the thing that we needed in the very end to really sell the whole thing. Creating scale on a model is so essential, and when you have big smooth surfaces and you photograph them with a camera, they look small, they don't have any detail. In movies like 2001, they glued tank parts all over the things to create texture or detail. So how were we going to do that on a model like the Enterprise? Well, we had windows, and we had thrusters, and we had technical parts over there, and we had circular hatches and all of that, but the big broad surfaces needed to have detail. And when you look at aircraft and you see the metal pieces, whether that's riveted together or in a new technological aircraft, the stealth planes and so forth, their surface is really amazingly smooth. But by creating the panel design that you worked up and having those different specularities to those different paints, when you would see that thing at an angle, you would see all these panels in detail across there. And it was essential to make the Enterprise have a scale. It was the final touch that it needed to break up those big smooth surfaces and make them have detail.
What have you been doing since for the last 35 years, Richard?
Well, after Star Trek, I worked with Terry Malick for a year on a film that he was creating, which actually kind of ended up being The Tree of Life years later. But I worked for over a year with Terry Malick, and again, this was pre-digital, although as it was a film that involved cosmological imagery of forming the proto-Earth, and then we were going to do these other shots of the proto-Earth, and it was a film that was going to evolve through the creation of the Earth down to early man, and then the second half of the film was going to be a love story with early man. And so the cosmological imagery for that, I had been keeping my eye on at Abels and everywhere, exactly what's evolving in industry as far as techniques and technology. And I had two good friends, John Whitney and Gary Demos, who had started a division of Information International Incorporated. And before they started that, they had worked at Evans and Sutherland for a while with vector graphic computer simulation. But they were doing some of the very first raster graphic computer imaging. And for people who aren't familiar with what that means, it's when the computer imitates the effect of light hitting an object and bouncing it to a theoretical camera and creates a dimensional object. It's imitating photography in light. And that was the beginning of computer simulation as we know it now. And I saw that technique and I immediately knew it was the future of entertainment. If it was that crude then, whenever you see something new, you know it's only going to get better and better. And now there is nothing that we can't create that you can imagine on film. So I saw this and I realized that that was really the only way to do cosmological imagery, you know, not with cloud tanks, not with any other form of multi-planing stuff, but to really dimensionally create clouds in or nebular gas in outer space and to create a planet forming. So Paramount gave me some funds from Terry's project and I started doing some tests at Information International. And eventually Terry decided not to make the film, and I ended up approaching John Whitney and Gary to start a commercial division. They had done some work on different projects, but they were, you know, Gary was a computer programmer scientist and John's father was a filmmaker, but they were kind of disorganized, and so I came in and literally started a production company, and we hired a couple of other people and we put together a team and a studio and started doing work with computer imaging. So that's what I did for through '82. So I started at III in 1980. I did a sample reel for them and went to SIGGRAPH. It blew everybody's mind because I did this juggler and stuff, and that led to us doing the effects for Looker, a Michael Crichton picture that I directed the effects for, and then that led to Tron. And Tron was really the film that introduced the world to computer simulation, to cyberspace. It was the first film to tell a story in cyberspace. In the scheme of things, Tron was like the gateway into computer simulation. We did in that movie everything that would have been done with physical models, with computer models. And then the characters...
And the most famous being...
Oh yes, the light cycles, yes, were one of them. And that was wonderful because I got to work with Sid Mead for the first time and met Sid, and he and I have been good friends ever since. One of the most talented people in the world.
He's incredible.
As an illustrator, as a futurist, as a designer. And
Did you ever see his drawings for Blade Runner?
Oh yes, I've seen all that stuff. I've been on the board of the Visual Effects Society for years, and I've been the vice chair several times. And this last year, for our Black Tie Gala celebration, our awards, the Visionary Award was given to Sid Mead. I nominated him, and every other year it had been a famous director, and I nominated him, and the board and everybody went for it. And so, for the first time, a real visionary actually got the Visionary Award. And it was so wonderful to see him get that award. And Ridley Scott was there getting the Lifetime Achievement Award, so they had that in common. And I actually introduced Ridley Scott to the work of Sid Mead, and that led to him hiring Sid to do all the work on Blade Runner.
Oh, right.
Ridley Scott came to III when he was doing research for Blade Runner.
Mm-hmm.
He wanted to know what could be done with computer simulation. He was thinking about using it to create the way that they were scanning buildings and things, the police. And I started asking about the film, and he told me, and he said they were going to do these hovercraft, these spinners and things. And I said, well, you know, who's designing all that stuff? And he said, well, I'm not sure, you know. And I said, well, what do you mean? It's not Sid Mead? And he said, who's Sid Mead?
You said.
And I said, well, here, and I had United States Steel book, one of the first real books that he was noted in, that had all these futuristic cars and beautiful illustrations. And I handed the book to Ridley, and he opened it, and literally I saw his eyes like widen, and he's like, can I borrow this? And I'm like, well, I don't know, it's one of my favorite things and they're really hard to get. He said, "Oh, I promise I'll return it absolutely." "Oh, you should not just producer." "Oh, yes, I'll return it." Well, he never did. But he hired Sid, and the very first illustration that Sid did, when he included the backgrounds and everything, it was exactly what Ridley was imagining or knew existed in a way, but Sid made it happen, and Sid really became the production designer for the film. The
Yeah.
look of the city, the streets, the not just the craft, but the whole feel of the place.
Did you ever see the set?
Yes, I did. I saw part of the sets because if you remember, Blade Runner came out the same year as Tron. That was 1982, and 1982 was one of the all-time years in the history of special effects. I mean, Blade Runner, Poltergeist, E.T., Das Boot, Dark Crystal, Firefox,
That was Apogee.
that was Apogee. All these films came out, and those are some powerful films right there, and Tron. And so we were all working on those projects kind of simultaneously, and I went over to the Warner Brothers lot, and I knew they were working on the film over there, and I kind of snuck around and got a look at some of the sets after they'd used them and they were down. That was a brutal movie for everybody that worked on it, Blade Runner, because of everything being wet.
Wet, yeah.
And they were smoking everything up like crazy, and people started to get reactions to breathing all that smoke, and it wasn't it was more toxic then, let's put it that way. But yeah, I saw some of the sets, and Blade Runner is on my top 5 of science fiction films. I think it is incredibly entertaining, beautifully designed, really well directed, and just stunning.
Well, I mean, just you and me talking, but that I think, I mean, my favorite film from every point of view in terms of creativity and photography and direction is Alien.
Mm.
When I moved over to England in 91, after doing Terminator 2, and I went over to the place where Morris Binder, the General Screen Enterprises is called, where Morris Binder did all the James Bond titles, and he had just died. And so I was going to do all the James Bond titles because the guy there, Fred Chandler, had a lot of my artwork that had been sent over from Universal and from Paramount. And so we hit it off, and he said, "Paul, look, Ridley needs some help on a film he's doing. It was for the 500th anniversary of Christopher Columbus crossing the Atlantic, discovering America," which he didn't. So Fred said, so he introduced me to Ridley up at Pinewood, and Ridley said, well, he said, what I want for the opening titles is I want to really show what the world was like at that time in Spain. And it was horrible, with the Inquisition and everything. And so I went down to the Spanish embassy to find out everything I could, and I did these storyboards, and they were really gruesome and horrible. Ending up looking at seeing a stained glass church window, and on the other side of a stained glass church window is a woman being burned at the stake, and she's screaming and writhing as the flames come up. I mean, really horrible, the kind of thing I don't like to do, right? So I did this. Ridley loved it. He said, that's exactly what I'm looking for. And I said, but Ridley, your title, Voyage of Discovery, Christopher Columbus Voyage of Discovery, I said, that's a real mouthful. And I said, to an English person, what's the most famous date in English history? And he said, well, 1066. I said, right. In America, it's 1492. That's the title of your film. And that became the title. And then Ridley fucked off back to California and had all the titles and all the opening sequence done here. And I got aced out, totally. And he did, not without a by your leave or anything, and Fred was so embarrassed that he tagged on extra costs onto the opticals, because he was still doing some of the opticals. and paid me out of his own pocket.
Oh, that's nice.
Yeah, but I mean, really. And on the other hand, Tony was the sweetest guy, and so talented as well. And I was able to. I walked into scot-free in 2001.
Here in LA.
So yeah, I moved back over here in little Santa Monica there.
Yep.
And I just walked in the office and I had my Western script built around the characters that I had created for the beef jerky thing I did back in England. And and I just said, is Tony in? And the secretary said, yeah, who should I say? And I said, Paul Olsen. He doesn't know me, but I just wanted to pop in and say hi. And so his office was in the back, and he opened the door and he went like that. So I called him at a good moment, and we sat and talked, and I said, I've got a script. And nobody ever reads a script, you know. No, I can't, you know, because you might be doing the same thing, you know.
Yeah.
And he said, Paul, I'll read it, and come back tomorrow. I'll read it tonight.
Really?
You know? Yeah. And so I came back the next day, and he said, Paul, come in, sit down. He said, Paul, if I was ever going to make a Western, this would be it. But I'm never going to make a Western. And he said, you know the kind of movies I make. And he said, I'm just not interested in doing a period Western.
Yeah.
That's just, but he said, if I ever was, that's the movie.
Oh, that's nice.
What an accolade, you know?
Well, that's
And he
incredible
was a
that he
sweet guy.
read it in one. I mean,
I know. It was just one of those,
you know, you have to. It takes time to read a script. You know, it takes
Yeah.
about the time it takes to see the movie, unless you're really.
yeah, but I mean, you can do it in a couple hours.
Yeah,
You know?
right.
Yeah. So, but that was great, and
Very
you know,
nice.
it was such a shame. Whatever there must have been a terminal disease. It's-
Well, that or depression, or you know, I mean, what killed Robin Williams?
Yeah.
Like
yeah,
you don't know the demons inside.
Yeah, that's true.
No matter how famous or successful they are, they can be miserable.
yeah. But he was the sweetest guy. He
Yes.
really was.
Yeah, smoked a lot of cigars.
As opposed to his brother. Sorry.
Yeah. So I've met Ridley
Yeah.
multiple times, but I always met him in a situation where he was polite.
Yeah.
Although, to finish that story about the book, so we never returned it. Years later, I'm flying to New York. This is when I'm directing lots of commercials. And who's sitting next to me but Ridley Scott in first class? And he'd come back from shooting what was it? Something Rain, the one that was done in Japan about the Yakuza and all that.
I don't know.
Black Rain, something like that. And so he's sitting next to me, and I said, "You are Ridley Scott, are you not?" He said, "Oh yes, yes. You know, he was like it." And I said, "Well, excuse me, you may not remember me. My name's Richard Taylor. I'm in the DGA, so we're
In the same.
in the same club." He said, "Oh really?" Yeah. And I said, and you know, I directed the effects on Tron, the feature. "Oh really? You did Tron?" You know, and then I said, "But you may not remember. I met you." Before when you were prepping for Blade Runner, and I was actually prepping for Tron, and you came to Triple I, and I introduced you to Sid Mead's work, and you borrowed a book of mine, and you promised to return it, but you never did. And I wasn't afraid to bring this up because I was really pissed about it. But
Well, yeah.
So and he goes, "Really?" And I said, "Yeah." I said, "Look, here's my card. If you have it's the United States Steelbook, it's white, you know, but I did introduce you to Sid Mead, so if I could get the book, that would be great." He goes, "Oh yes, I'll take care of that, you know, all that." And then we never spoke the rest of the flight. Well, he never returned the book.
Yeah.
But I saw him at the thing, and you know, I don't ever bring it up, but I did tell this story in the documentary on Sid Mead, in Sid Mead's documentary.
So you got that in.
I got it in. But Sid Mead is one of the world's greatest designer illustrators, and just a great person.
Yeah.
It's hard for any artist not to really love Sid Mead's work. His craftsmanship as a painter, his lighting, his compositions are phenomenal. And then the attention to detail technologically, and always pushing the envelope as a futurist. You know, whether it's a Ringworld or it's the spacecraft for 2010. You know, he is just, and the light cycles, you know, a number of things that he has done, both for film, but in the real world, you know, designing real interiors and real cars and things. He's just wonderful. So Tron was, so briefly about Tron, the Academy nominates films through a process they call the Bake Off, and each film that the Academy deems worthy of being looked at for the Academy Award, you put together 10 minutes of footage and you go to the Academy Theater, and there's a committee that sat there, and you would show 10 minutes of the film, and then a spokesperson for each film would stand up and talk about the film or answer questions. That year, in 1982, they expanded the committee to over 100 people. Before it had been 40 people, and they were people that in the original committee were from the film industry, in the technical, you know, had optical houses or model shops or,
Right.
or were DPs. Well, when they expanded it, they added actors and directors and producers and other people that didn't technically know that much. So when each film was shown and the questions were asked, usually it'd be 10, 15, 20 minutes of questions, and the questions were always from knowledge. Those models you made were the 8th scale. When you shot those explosions, did you overcrank those at 150 frames a second, 200 frames a second? You know, what camera did you use? They were all questions from knowledge. When I got up to answer the questions after showing Tron, nobody raised their hand. Nobody raised their hand.
Because nobody knew.
And I said, gee, I thought I was here to answer questions about Tron, not the Twilight Zone. And I got a chuckle, you know. And then I said, there must be a question about how this film was made. And finally somebody tentatively raised their hand and said, these are the real questions. What kind of camera did you use? And I said, well, we used, we shot in 70 millimeter, the live action, especially in the electronic world. The whole film was shot in 70. And then we had a photoroto machine that took those frames and projected them down and made cells that we then shot on 18 animation cameras that had backlit boxes to do all the stuff in the electronic world. The characters there, that's all done by hand. There's no computers involved. I didn't say that. I just said that's done by hand. So there are 18 cameras there. And then we, models in this film were done with computer simulation. And I answered the question that nobody wanted to ask. And what everybody wanted to ask is, how does a computer make pictures like that? And nobody was going to ask that question. And I said, and so what computer simulation is the camera, we make a model, and there are different techniques for doing that, but there's an object. And the computer throws lots of rays at it. Each ray is a little beam, and it hits that object and bounces to a theoretical camera at a different angle of deflection, and therefore a different value. And the computer's imitating the effect of light hitting an object, bouncing it to a theoretical camera. And that's how we make the objects. And so instead of physical models, we made computer models. But I answered the question saying, and so at the computer simulation companies, III, Robert Abel, and Magi Synthevision, they had film recorders that looked at high-resolution CRTs with a camera and would make a red, green, and blue pass shooting a high-resolution monitor. So that was 3 other cameras right there. So altogether, maybe 25 cameras. Okay. Then it was silence again, and I said, are there any other questions? And then somebody raised their hand and said, did you make any models? And I said, yes, we made models. We made study models of the Solar Sailor and certain models that were computer models, but we had to make set pieces that matched them when we shot the live action of the characters in the electronic world. And all that was done on black, and the characters wore white with black designs. And then that was all photographically processed to create the look. The computers did not do that. But we made some study models. But we made the models for the computer by drawing blueprints, the orthographic views of the Solar Sailor or Sark's Carrier, whatever, and we put that on a big digitizing tablet. It's a tablet that has a sensor. We had a cursor, and you would go on there, and each time you click it, it would save that point. So we drew the front view, top view, and side view, and those were encoded through this thing to make a wireframe model that we could see on a computer screen. And then that, with the computer programs, can be smoothed and shaded, and that's how we made the objects. Magi Synthovision used another process, using Boolean objects, adding and subtracting primary shapes to create their models. But in any case, we made models in the computer, but the amount of time it took to make them in the computer, drawing the prints, encoding them, then trying to find where those polys weren't matching. And this is at a time when computer simulation was slow. I mean, feedback from a computer, you type, and it would like that, and a picture would show up, and then feedback to an engine. It wasn't like now, it's instantaneous. The amount of energy, the amount of time it took to make those CG models was probably paralleled if we had made physical models, really, maybe more. But we could do impossible things with them that you could never do with a physical model. There are no physical limitations to the camera in computer simulation in the computer world. There's no limit to the physical objects. They can pass right through each other or morph or change. So there's just all these magical things that can happen once you go to the computer simulated world. And Tron was that doorway. Tron was not nominated for Academy Award. I felt a massive amount of hostility standing there. I went backstage and ran into my good buddy Richard Edlund, who worked with me at Abels and Star Wars and all that. And John Dykstra was there, and I said, wow, that was so bizarre. I really felt like people really were pissed off. I said, what do you think was going on? And Richard said, I think they think you cheated. And I said, what do you mean? And he said, I think they think the computer did all the work. And I sent some of my friends over there out to talk to people who were exiting, and they came and said, that's right. They said, we just kind of typed shit in, and the computer made it. Like, I want a Solar Sailor that looks like something that Mobius would have drawn, and that had, and it's going left to right, and it's got gossamer wings. Enter. They really had no idea exactly how that interface worked, and so the amount of human labor and work that went into doing Tron in the computer simulation side was massive, because we were inventing it while we were doing it, and I had to combine the simulation from the separate companies with different ways of making things and make them have continuity. It was hard to do, and basically Tron was not nominated. Blade Runner, Poltergeist, and E.T. were, and I think Blade Runner should have won it, but
E.T.
E.T. won it. It has matte lines and all kinds of things, E.T., compared to Blade Runner, Poltergeist, or Tron. Tron should have received a Technical Achievement Award. That didn't happen until The Last Starfighter came out, and they got the Academy Award for Computer Simulation. Technical Achievement Award. In any case, it was a really pivotal moment in time in filmmaking and in the technology of what's going on visually in the world today. And I've watched it evolve, and I have always been lucky to kind of jump on the next thing that I could see coming. And so computer simulation took off, and it took half the time I thought it would take to get to Jurassic Park, where you were making organic living creatures and you could really believe them. It took half the time I thought it would. The software, the hardware, everything just started accelerating, and thanks to ILM and George Lucas and other people and Pixar and all of that, it started to really boil. And so now there's nothing that computer simulation can't create. Nothing. Massive armies, the end of the world, San Andreas, you name it. There's nothing. And down to photoreal people that are absolutely believable. In this last Fast and Furious 7, what's his name? Paul, the actor, who was one of the main characters who died. There are 266 scenes featuring Paul, whatever his name is. I need to get that right. 266 scenes of him in that movie doing everything, acting close-ups, carrying people, fighting, and never for a moment do you ever believe it isn't real. I mean, we broke that barrier with Benjamin Button and other things. I mean, one of the best effects that's been done in the last 20 years was Gollum. But he was a character creature. The hardest thing to do of all is a beautiful woman, you know. And we know faces better than anything. So for you to really believe there's a soul in there and eyes, and that actor is really there coming out, Benjamin Button was really the first to really do that. Now it's done more than you know. So, and in gaming, you know, we're creating close to photoreal characters in real time, interactive. So I directed commercials for years using all those techniques, did a lot of really wonderful projects. The neat thing about directing commercials is you can work on a lot of different types of ideas and work with a lot of different people in a very short period of time. It's not like a feature where you're on it for a year or more. It's the same subject matter, the same thing. You know, I could be 3 commercials deep, one in pre-production, design, storyboarding, one that we're shooting, and one that's in post. And I was doing that for years, and that's where some of these awards came from. But the whole advertising industry, as the complexity of media has gotten more and more dense, you know, there are thousands of channels now, and every kind of media device in the world, so we have millions of options, and advertising and commercial direction was starting to be affected by that, the multiple of places that a television commercial could play. So advertising started to change, and I was seeing half as much work as I had and bidding on stuff against other directors, and everybody dropping their prices to get work to keep their studios going, and I just could see the writing on the wall. And also I was getting up there in years, and advertising is age-centric, you know. Advertising people from the agencies want to work with young people with new ideas, and whether you can hang with them and do, which I can, but they, you know, they want to work with young people. So as you start to get older, you know, you start to not be considered as much. And I saw an opportunity in games. I had a home in Park City, Utah, and I was hitting some balls in the range with a good friend, and he happened to work for Microsoft Gaming Studios in Salt Lake, and they did the Lynx snowboarding games and the golf games, the Lynx 2003, 2004. They did the golf games, and I said, hey, you know, I do this. And he knew what my reputation was worth, and he said, why don't you come down sometime? We'd love to have you come down and talk to us about camera work and that kind of stuff. So I went down and met everybody there, and we got along great. And I came back up about 6-8 weeks later, and I just thought, you know, games is the next thing. And I talked to Lanny, and I went down and talked. I said, how about I work here for a year or whatever, so I can learn how games are done, and I'll do the cinematics for you. And I literally learned Maya, and I did 800 and some shots myself, making CV curves with a camera. I directed all the mocap for the golfers in the game, but I learned how a game was designed and built in the whole process, and I did it for Topspin and for the linked golf games and for a couple of snowboarding games, and I learned a lot. And from that work was seen at E3, and Glenn Entis, who was one of the guys who started one of the first computer simulation companies that became DreamWorks, saw that work, and he was now working for EA as kind of creative director overall, and he said, who did those commercials for those game things? And they said, oh, Richard Taylor. And he said, well, it can't be the Richard Taylor I know, because he's probably dead and covered with cobwebs in a corner somewhere. And they said, well, it's the guy that did Tron. He said, really? He said, oh, that's amazing. And he called me and said, hey, I saw this stuff. Are you doing stuff in games? I said, well, commercials are a little good. I got this gig, and he said, well, I'd love, by the way, that work was being done in Utah, and he said, well, I'd love to have you join EA and become, direct cinematics. And he wanted me to go to Canada where they had a big facility, and I said, I can't really do that for a variety of personal reasons. I needed to be here in LA. And so I became the cinematics director at Electronic Arts in Los Angeles and directed the cinematics on quite a few games. And the first ones I did were using the game engine, and they were RTS games, and there was a really naivety to the models and all that. So I just, when you got lemons, make lemonade, made stuff that worked. But the Command and Conquer franchise, which I directed a multiple of, is the one that has live action combined with computer simulation, using all the techniques that we use to do feature films. And so I had Billy D. Williams and Michael Ironside and Tricia Helfar and these wonderful actors, and Tim Curry, people like that played these roles. J.K. Simmons played the President of the United States. He was great to work with, very funny. But we started doing those, and they really were fun to do. They were small features, really. Beautiful costuming, designing, lighting, camera work, designed it all from scratch, and all of the GUI, the graphics that interlaces with all of the gameplay, and to tell the story. I put together a team of like 12 to 15 people, and we did a series of those, the last one being Red Alert 3, which was a stylization and had, kind of a tongue-in-cheek kind of thing. But it was really fun to work with those actors and to do a lot of soft sets, which was really cool. I built a lot of foreground set pieces and props that you hold and all that, but the majority of the set extensions were CG, and the people in the background, they're all CG, and you don't know, you just go, wow, what a beautiful cathedral they shot that in. So it was really fun to do that, and that led to that was like 6 or 7 years of work doing that, and then I started working freelance because EA went through a crunch when the recession hit, and so they decided to shut down all the cinematics divisions in all their facilities and just to subcontract that. So I then started working freelance and worked at Ewan Company and did. So I did a lot of work, and I started doing 3D work. I did the closing credits for Shrek 4 that had to summarize all the different movies in all 3D. I designed some 3D logos for 3Reality and Oculus and some other people. That's a different Oculus than Oculus Rift. They were creating a 3D lens system. So I did a lot of work at Ewan Company, directed some cinematics for Ubisoft, did some commercials for the game industry. And then I saw what I believe is the next thing, which I'm totally entranced with now, and that is what everybody's referring to as VR, or virtual reality. I was approached by Disney to create a venue for Comic-Con to advertise and promote Tron Legacy. And they had seen some dome things, and so when they came to me, I was working at Ewan Company, and they came and asked if I could help design something, had any ideas, and could it be some kind of dome thing. So I started researching all the dome structures and projections and companies that were doing expos and every way that was being done. And as a part of that, I found this company, McCoy, who had a inflatable dome and then a single projector, and they had written software where when you were in there, wherever you looked, it's 3D. So instead of a rectangle in front of you on a flat plane, which is how everybody sees 3D in movies, and if it's IMAX, it's a big frame, but there's one direction that things are 3D, on the Z-axis only. Things come out at you and go back at you, and if it goes anywhere else, there's edge violation, it's gone. 3-space is what I call it, is basically a theatrical space in which you sit or walk or could stand. It can be in different configurations, but wherever you look around you, because you're in either a giant cylinder or you're in a sphere. But basically, and it can be done with projection, which is how I've been working for the last like 5 years. But there is another better way to do it all, and that's part of what I'm working on now. But basically, if it's projectors, they're edge blended together. It's really high resolution. I mean, the final product is really high resolution, high frame rate. And what you're trying to do is create photoreality that's all around you wherever you look. That's what VR headsets are. But VR headsets, and anything that's a headset piece, at least in their current design, you have a window in front of you. Okay, you are looking. They say, "Oh, it's immersive. It's VR. It's it's a three-dimensional immersive world." Well, it is if you look around, but you don't know you're there unless you look around through this window. And that's not the same as us sitting here in this room now with all this imagery around us. And there are camera systems now, and one of them that I'm starting to work with now, the Ozo, made by Nokia. There are spherical cameras that shoot in stereo, and I could hang one right here, right now, and it would be capturing us in three-dimensionality, everything around us, and I could take it into the right theater, configured, and recreate us sitting here just like this in photo, shooting at 60 frames a second with 8 cameras on the horizontal and 2 above, 2 below, each one of those 4K, and so you're shooting photoreality and you're making it as real as possible. And my goal, more than anything, is to create photoreal human beings standing there, real human scale, that you absolutely believe. And we can do that. I mean, I mentioned earlier that we can make photoreal human beings in movies, and in that case you're even going in doing close-ups. But if we're going to create reality, and I want to create Frank Sinatra on stage at the Sands Hotel with the Rat Pack, and you're like you were in the audience there, they're at real human scale, they're at a particular distance and so forth, and even if you're telling a story where they come up close to you, a close-up in photography, in traditional filmmaking, is I cut in like this because it's surrounded by a frame. A close-up in this room is you getting close to me, otherwise you're a big head. So everything about staging something in this real three-dimensional world is different than shooting a film through a rectangle. And it's fabulous. And so have been working for 6 years now, have done multiple pieces, and we're getting really close to a theater being built. And the way that we're going to go is that the entire theater, the inside, will be solid state. It won't be projection. So it'll seat 220 people. In any case, that world of virtual reality, as people are referring to it, is the future of storytelling. It's the next entertainment format. It is when you surround people, and I've seen it when I take my grandchildren to see the stuff I'm working on. Ever since they saw it, whenever we go to see a 3D movie, they go, "That's not 3D. What Papa does is 3D. That's all." It's really immersive and it's really amazing, and you can create anything then. You can see the ancient wonders of the world, go on a tour of them, you could recreate a Broadway show, you can do a virtual aquarium, Jurassic virtual aquarium, any aquarium. You can use real photography shot with the right camera systems and CG and mix them in ways that are all the tools we use to make movies. So it's the next entertainment format, and I'm thrilled to be working in it, but it's frustrating at times to get all the momentums together, but we're real close. So I've been really lucky over the years to kind of just move along with different kind of tech that's evolved in, and I think the three-space theater, in whatever configuration, whether it's a walk-through like you're in an aquarium, or whether you're sitting in an audience incline, wherever you look, whether it's motion-based, and there's all kinds of permutations of it in themed parks and in other venues, natural history museums and schools for education. Smaller versions can be made that are all interconnected, and so you can use for education and history and all of that. It's the next entertainment format, and the general focus in the public right now are the headsets, the Oculus and the Gear and the Valve and the Morpheus. Those are what everybody's paying attention to, and their resolution, it's not photoreal what you're looking at in there. I'm after another world, and photoreal doesn't need to be the only thing you see there. I mean, you can do a whole Fantasia of the future and have a EDM DJ and do a whole thing that's just visual music. So it's just a new palette. It'll be fun to see what evolves.
Well, Richard Taylor.
Yeah, that's part of what I'm working on. So.